Hi, I'm Jodie Rizzo-O'Brien, part of the AWI Extension South Australia team. In this 10-minute talk, we're going to hear from David Peck about establishing pasture legumes for your conditions. Can you tell me about the benefits of annual pasture legumes and how they're used in pasture systems?
Annual pasture legumes are high in quality, high in protein. They're particularly valuable to actively growing stock and their mothers. They are high in nitrogen. That allows the other grass and other components of the pastures to perform well. And in lay pasture systems, it means they're fixing nitrogen for the subsequent grain crops.
So how are annual pasture legumes generally used in our cropping systems, our mixed cropping systems?
So in the mixed cropping systems, the old sheep wheat area, annual pasture legumes have got a very long history. They have high levels of hard seeds. That means they can persist through 1, 2 or 3 grain crops and still come back from the soil's reserves. So it's about matching your hard seed levels with your cropping system.
You talked about lay pasture systems. What are they?
So lay pasture systems are cultivars and species that have high levels of hard seeds so that they can persist for 2 or 3 years of cropping. So you miss out on a bit of early growth, but you pick up in the persistence.
What are the traditionally grown pasture legumes?
So in the mixed farming zones in South Australia with our alkaline soils, annual medics are well and truly the ones that dominate. So strand medics for the sandier soils and the sandier loams, barrel medics for the clay soils and the loams, and burr medics if you've got a little bit of waterlogging or a little bit of salinity or a bit of acidicness to your soils. So when you move to the more acidic soils, traditionally it is subclovers that are performing in those areas. They at best can only go for 1-to-1 lay system. By and large, the medics are for the lower rainfalls to the low and medium rainfall areas. We don't have any late season annual medics, whereas the subclovers, you well and truly have to look at what maturity they have because they go from low, early flowering material to really late flowering material for the high rainfall areas. So you have to match your rainfall conditions to the cultivar choices that you make.
David, I understand there's been some recent annual medic cultivar releases. Can you tell me a bit more about those?
So we've got several new cultivars of annual medics have come on stream in the last dozen years or so. We have got a group of material that is tolerant of the sulfuron urea herbicides or SU herbicides. They're tolerant of the residues, not the full label rate. In our alkaline soils, they can damage your medics for 1 to 5 years, just the same as they do to your pulse crops. So we have got Caliph, derived Sultan SU. It's effectively Caliph, but it's got SU tolerance in it. We have got Penfield. It is also an early material. So both of those, if you've got low rainfall in an early district. We've got Jester SU if it's a mid-season cultivar. So if you've got slightly more rainfall, that would be the one that you would choose. We have also got Seraph Strand Medic, which is also an early season one, but it has got indeterminate growth. So if the rainfall keeps falling, it will keep growing. So they are some new medics available, but we also have got Emperor, which is tolerant of powdery mildew resistance. It's a mid-season cultivar, and Seraph is also tolerant of the powdery mildew. So the powdery mildew is more likely to be a problem when we have had a wet summer, and it can start building in autumn, and then if you've got a wet spring, it can really damage your medic crop. So we've also got spineless medics. So we were finding that some of the wool growers, the superfine wool growers, were growing spineless burr medics because they valued that trait, because the spinelessness meant no pods at all were in their fleece. So they were growing burr medics when barrel medics are better suited. So that is why we developed Penfield, which is spineless. And the Seraph is also, it's very small spine. It's only really got a little remnant. You'll find it's a lot less spiny than Herald and Harbinger and the old historic Strand Medic cultivars.
The project also looked at alternative pasture legumes. Tell me a bit more about those.
So in the last 2 or 3 decades, several new alternative pasture legumes have come on board. They are supported by a seed industry, and in Western Australia, where a lot of them were developed, and New South Wales, they are mainstream species. They were developed for acidic soils. So by and large, they haven't been tested a lot in South Australia. We are remedying that now. So the ones that we have tested and are showing promise are Ceradella, and arrowleaf clover. So some others such as bicerula, they haven't really performed for us in here, and also bladder clover. You can look into them, but they're not performing as well as the Sardellas.
In which environments?
So these ones were originally developed in acidic soils, so you have to look in your part of your farm that is less than pH of 7, so probably 6.5 below. The Sardellas particularly were developed for sandy soils, so think about your sandy dunes where the pH is less than 6.5, and they certainly have outperformed both vetch and strand medics in those situations.
Can you talk a bit more about how you sow these pastured legumes for long-term success?
So if you're interested in pasture legumes, particularly late pasture legumes, it's all about getting the planting right, so that if you get the planting right, they are there for the long term and can fix that nitrogen for either your livestock or for the grasses. So the big levers you can pull is your sowing rates, your sowing date, and your management. So the earlier you sow, the more warmth they have before winter comes along, and the more seed set that you will achieve. Look at what are the recommended sowing rates for these species that you're interested in too. So medics are often recommended at 7.5 to 10 kilograms per hectare. A lot of farmers wish to save money by cutting that sowing rate. But before you do that, consider what you're trying to do, which is trying to be successful with a seed set in that year. Look at the total cost of sowing your pastures. What is the cost of getting your tractor out of the shed, doing a few laps of the field with it? What is the cost of failing to get a good seed set this year? So if you halve your seed cost, you probably only reduce your total cost by 20%, but you have more than doubled your chances of a failure.
3 key takeaways for producers from your research that you've done.
Think about your pasture legumes. They are a big driver of your system. They can drive your livestock, they drive your cropping. So think about them more, talk about them more. So when you're at the ram sales, don't just talk about rams. Ask your neighbour, ask your mate, how's your pastures going? Have they improved on last year? So the more you know about your pastures, the more they will perform for you. But they are high in nitrogen, they're high in protein, they are high in quality, they are a big driver of the overall system.
Can you tell me about how you might find out more about these new cultivars and species?
So there's a lot of information out there, so just do a web search on those species or cultivars of interest. You'll find a lot of information about them. If it's alternative species, the information may well be coming from New South Wales or WA, so you just got to consider the South Australian impact, and particularly if the pHs that they're talking about are suitable for you and your farm.
Thanks, David, for sharing your experience and expertise on establishing pasture legumes for your environment. This 10-minute talk was made possible by the support of Australian Wool Innovation, the Department of Primary Industries and Regions, and the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund.